Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 21st episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, now that our podcast is 21, what type of shot would you buy our podcast?
I'm not buying any shots. Nope, no buying shots for me.
You're just gonna have a mopey old 21st podcast with nothing?
I'll tell you what. I'll buy a tequila shot because I know you love tequila. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. I do like me some tequila, so I was going to say tequila if you didn't.
I knew you were, but I don't think podcasts can drink either. They're just like they're like a creation we put out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. It was more of like a hypothetical question, Not a rhetorical question, though. Do you know what a rhetorical question is?
Yeah, it's a question that you're not intending to get an answer from.
I know, that question in itself was rhetorical.
Oh, I didn't realize it was a rhetorical question.
Anyways, so today's topic is deck building. You're going to teach us all how to craft Masterpiece Wounded Bull deck building today, Michael.
I'm gonna try to share some tips on building some good decks. I feel like I have a pretty reasonable track record for making decks, so hopefully I can help some people out today.
Okay, so I want to build Levia. How do I make a good Levia deck?
So, if you want to play a specific hero, which sounds like you want to play some Levia, you want to figure out what the most powerful things you can be doing in Levia are, right?
I would assume so.
So
you don't want to do not powerful things.
So, the main thing you want to look at, in my opinion, is you want to look for either combinations of cards that produce above rate damage output for what you spend on them, or just other powerful interactions that are only available to your specific hero. So Levia has I'm honestly not a Levia expert, but I think Levia has several things she can do that are reasonably above rate. Playing cards like Ghostly Visit and Howl from Beyond from her Banish Zone is very above rate because you're just spending the resources to play them, not actually spending a full card from your hand. So if you play Ghostly Visit from your Banish Zone, you get 4 damage for 1 resource and an action point. Very good rate. That's on par with Rosetta Thorn.
Doing it. But you're not having the arcane damage, so.
Yeah. Rosetta Thorn's sure something. Romping Club is also pretty easy to make above rate. If you discard a card, you can do 2 resources for 5 damage. Problem is a lot of the discard a card effects take your action point also, so you have to really work to make that work, if that makes sense.
I guess so. So you need to make the cards that are easy to work, but don't work too hard to make the cards that don't work.
Yeah, so you want the things that are powerful, like Romping Club, like playing these Blood Deck cards from Banish. I'm sure there's other things that are powerful in Levia. Just Swing Big by itself is pretty powerful, and there's some other things she can do that I am not a Levia expert and don't claim to be. So I don't exactly know the best things, but you want to find the powerful things she can do and figure out how to make those things as powerful and consistent as possible. And yeah, so.
Okay, so do powerful things, step 1 to building a deck.
Yeah, find powerful things and make them work.
And then with step 2, I'm going to go out on a limb here. It would be find good cards to do powerful things. So don't play the bad cards, but find the good cards.
Yeah, so once you figure out what the powerful things you want to do, you should honestly probably throw a deck together, trying to do those things as often as possible. See if those powerful things are like things you can do consistently, and when you can do them, are they powerful enough to warrant like building a deck around them? And then if you get to the point where those things are quite powerful, then you want to adjust the remaining cards in the deck to like kind of support that or be as powerful without those things as you can.
So do you have any examples of like good deck building iterations that you've noticed throughout time?
What do you mean by good deck building iterations?
Like decks that you feel like have been developed well over the course of their life cycle or have been doing very powerful things that people have taken inspiration from when deck building?
So I guess a good example would be Tarek Patel has talked a lot about coming up with Lightning Briar based off of a draft deck where he had many 0-cost attack actions, and he found that really powerful, and he wanted to try it constructed. And then that's where the that's kind of the origin story of Lightning Briar, based off a limited deck. And then taking a limited deck, taking a concept from the limited deck and pushing it to the extremes and constructed and seeing how powerful it was. Turned out to be one of the most powerful decks the game has ever seen, and quickly earned Briar an errata and several card bans as well. Another example of an idea from Limited is the Icelander deck that I ended up taking to Nationals. I found attack actions were really good in my Limited Icelander decks, and I wanted to try it in Classic Constructed. And again, it ended up being quite powerful to just have these very efficient attacks in your deck in Constructed as well. Other places you can look for deck ideas would be if there's just like a powerful card or interaction that you think is underutilized. An example of that would be when Lightning Briar got banned out, Briar still had Channel Mount Heroic, which is one of the most powerful cards in the game probably, and it wasn't being used at all. So rather than just playing a worse version of the old Lightning Briar, the deck got completely reworked to support this Channel Mount Heroic card that single-handedly was basically worth 9 plus damage, frequently significantly more than that. It could be worth up to like 15 or 18, depending on how the turns lined up. Another place to look would be taking an existing deck that has some problems and trying to solve them. A couple examples of that would be jumping back to my Icelander deck. I found a lot of the red damage arcane spells to be pretty inefficient, and it would be hard to win the game playing such inefficient damaging cards in Class Constructed, where basically the asks on your deck are pretty high because it's constructed and you're playing as other constructed decks. Another example would be Oldheim, taking what was basically only originally a fatigue deck and adding powerful attacks to it so it could have game against decks that weren't just completely folding to fatigue, or decks that would actually outvalue Oldheim in a long game, like Dash and Prism. Though I don't think that Prism matchup was ever really fixed. And then the last thing would be building decks to counter popular decks. So in the Starvo meta, there was both, when I played in Indianapolis, I took a more controlling version of Starvo that I thought was quite favored in the mirror because it had more defense reactions and was less reliant on Crown of Seeds Rampart and just happy to just block with more 3 blocks. And then another example would be at the Orlando Calling, where I played Oldheim in the Lightning Briar meta to basically attack the Briars that really were trying to function off no blue, no pitch, and just playing a bunch of 0 cost actions. Just attacking with Winner's Well every turn was very good against that.
Okay. So I think we started off solid with the limited decks and some of your examples for creating decks from scratch, but I'm going to push up my imaginary nerd glasses here and say, Michael, some of your later examples were examples of deck tuning, not deck construction. So, and I think that's an important distinction because most of the time what I will say is that I am very bad at creating a deck from scratch, like deck construction, just trying to come up with like a novel idea or try to tie together a bunch of pieces for resources in order to just build something that hasn't been seen before. Whereas I think I'm quite good at tuning established lists. I think you know, one of my favorite things to say is I love turning cards that are like D's in lists into like C's, or if you're lucky, even like a B, where you're just like finding those small little marginal upgrades in order to push the deck to like a higher level. And that's something I quite enjoy, like I said. But as far as like, if you're like, Roger, I need you to build me a Kano deck from scratch. I'm not going to show you any examples of a Kano deck. I would be like, I would just throw all the Wizards cards in it and with no distinction because I just have no clue what I'm doing at that point.
So I think building and tuning I think there's a lot of overlap between them. They're definitely not the same thing, but if you had 2 months where you were just going to work on Kano, learn Kano, and I was like, Roger, you have 2 months, give me the best class constructed Kano list you can do in 2 months. Do you think you could come up with something pretty reasonable?
In 2 months?
In 2 months.
Yeah, if you gave me 2 months, I could do a lot of things in 2 months. I could probably build a boat in 2 months.
You can build a boat in 2 months?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what size of boat, but it could be some kind of boat.
Okay. Well, so I think deck building is a lot like tuning, where like specifically in Flesh and Blood, deck building is just taking an idea and building a deck out of it, and then after you build that first deck, it's just tuning from there to make the deck better and better, right?
Right, but like if you start with like, I guess we'll go back to my boat example. If you start with like a good solid boat foundation that's sailing on the seas and ready to good to go, it's pretty easy to just like tie up some masts and steer it in the right direction, put better engine oil in the motor boat engine oil. Mm-hmm. But if you start with pile of wooden sticks and try to put it out in the ocean, it takes a lot more time to get to that end state of an actual, functioning boat or deck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I feel like more often than not, I just wind up playing a bunch of wooden piles of sticks.
No, don't play the sticks. So
I can't help it, man. I look at this hero and I'm like, I tried. I'm like, I want to play like Rhinar or Levia. And then I put all the cards that I think would be good. And then I take it and I play it in some playtesting games. I load up Talishar and then I'm just out there swinging a bunch of sticks. And I'm like, Icelander it is.
So one nice thing about Flesh and Blood and almost all modern card games is deck lists get shared pretty quickly. If you want to look up what other people are doing in any specific hero, it wouldn't take you that long to find a few deck lists that you could use as starting points. Even if you're
but sometimes people win with sticks, though. Not every list that gets published or is like it makes a top 8 is necessarily good, right?
I would agree. Yeah, some you have to be selective about what decks you're choosing.
Yeah, I'm not going to name any names or any specific deck lists, but like. we've all seen a deck list be posted and we're like, what the heck is that person doing? I think a lot of people would have said that about you in Wounded Bull. They would have been like, am Michael drunk? He must have 6-0'd limited if you got like 8th place in Nationals with Wounded Bull in your deck. But since you won, everybody's like, he's a genius. He's breaking the game.
Yeah, I made me and Tannen were talking and he was like, yeah, if you do badly with this deck, everyone's going to think you're an idiot. I'm like, yep. So
you did well with the deck, and I still think you were an idiot.
Hey.
But, what are you going to do? I'm just not a Wounded Bull believer still. What can you do?
You're not playing any Wounded Bulls in your Icelander deck?
I'm probably just not going to play Icelander anymore. I'm a Levia main, like I said. I don't need Wounded Bull in my Levia deck. I already have a million 3/8s.
Yeah, Levia does not need Wounded Bull.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like Levia needs the opposite of Wounded Bull. It needs an I'm a head bull.
Healed bull, fresh bull.
You get ahead in Levia, and then one turn you miss your blood death, and you die.
Or one turn you roll your Scabskin Leathers, and you roll a 1. And you're like, well, your turn. I'll just skip my turn, thank you.
I'm not even positive Levia is ahead. I don't really know how much about Levia. I've said this before. Because she also needs to set up to get her cards in her discard to turn on all of her banished 3-card cards. So, I don't know. Levia's weird.
I know. That's why I'm going to main her. Okay. I'm going to call up Ethan and learn all the Levia tricks. Okay.
I think, Ethan's actually put up a ton of good Levia content on YouTube. I don't even know if you need to call him. Just go back and watch some of his many, many hours of Levia content. And you too can be a Levia master.
I do not like talking to people I don't know that well. Nothing against him. I'm a very introverted person. So the less I have to reach out and have the awkward, like, hey, I'm Roger Bodee. You've never heard of me, but I'm really good friends with Michael Hamilton, and I'd appreciate it if you could help me out. That's usually how I introduce myself in Flesh and Blood. I say,
is that really your introduction line?
Yeah, dude, you can check my DMs to like when I first messaged Zach or Flake or anybody. I'm just like, hey, I'm Roger. You don't have to worry about who I am, but I'm good friends with Michael. And then with Flake, I was pimping you out after you won Orlando. I was like, you should talk to Michael. He's really good. He's going to be something in this game. And he was like, yeah, whatever, kid. And then like he put you on for like 30 minutes. You still have never had a feature length instant speed podcast because Flake likes Tarek more than he likes you. And he has a secret grudge against you.
I thought I had a full length one.
No, it was like 25 minutes. I remember because I was like, what the heck? And speed podcast is supposed to be like 50 minutes and there's supposed to be the go again section and all that. So you didn't do any of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He's a Tarek simp. It's okay. We all know.
Tarek's pretty good at this game too, so.
No, he's not. Okay. No, he's not.
That's a hot take.
Is it?
Yes. Are we airing this?
Sure. Why not? I don't care. I'm the shit talker on the podcast, right?
Oh my gosh.
I'm the yin to your yang. You're pure good wholesomeness, and I'm the guy who's got to roll around in the mud and the dirt.
Just picking fights with everybody.
Hey, who have I ever picked fights with aside from Hayden Dale and his garbage Viceroy deck that I was completely right was bad, and Tariq Patel because he won 1 U.S. Nationals before anybody knew how to play the game, and then like 1 Canada Nationals that like 10 people and like a moose showed up to, and then
and also got second at the Cincinnati calling and almost top 8'd the Texas calling before that.
Are we counting almost top 8s? I got a lot of those. If almost top 8s count towards like a Hall of Fame record, I'm like almost there. I have 3 almost top 8s to my name, buddy. He
has a pretty good flesh and blood resume. Anyway, so deck building. So if you are looking to build a deck versus if you're looking to tune a deck, what is different in your eyes?
Well, like I said, like once a deck's presented to me and I see how it functions and I'm like, okay, so I guess a good example would be like when we were testing your more defensive Starvo deck, you're like, I need like efficient defense reactions. Like sometimes I just need to be able to block old Starvo or Starvo's attacks a little bit easier. I don't really know how to do it. My current options aren't great, and I don't really want to spend a lot of resources for it. And I was like looking through, and then I just kind of was like, well, what about Turn Timber? Turn Timber seems like once you're fusing it is a really good rate, and you can take some of your other cards that aren't necessarily performing how you want to do, and then Turn Timber wound up being like very good for you over the course of that weekend and like efficiently blocking when you needed to.
Yeah, definitely. So this was tuning. Was this? You consider that tuning a deck because it's just changing one card?
Yeah, I left like 99% of the deck alone. I just like changed like 3 cards to make it be able to block a little bit more efficiently in the spots where you needed it to. Mm-hmm. And like, that's what I like doing. Like somebody's like, or like Zach in the Runeblade chat will be like, my Runeblade cards aren't doing Runebladey things enough. And I'll just like go through and then I'll be like, well, I think you have like these options, and of these like options, I think this one probably seems the most promising and it could probably help you tune up your deck a little bit better. You know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I guess is the difference between deck building and deck tuning just like the idea stage?
It's like coming up with like, yeah, the strategy, the overall, like what is the deck trying to accomplish? Because when you just pick up or start creating from a random pile of cards, it's hard to know what exact operations and mechanics are leading to its strategy. So you even had like, I guess going back to like that Starvo list, like there's so many different ways to build almost every single hero in this game, where most Starvo lists were like Casino Starvo or very heavy aggressive Starvo. And then like coming in and like trying to pivot away from that idea into a more defensive Starvo was what led to basically tuning that list. Like I probably wouldn't have come up with like a more defensive Starvo or, you know, just looking at the card pools in other ways to build all these heroes. Mm-hmm. But once I'm presented with that idea and I see that it's like a working, functioning idea, I'm very interested in like I said, tuning and figuring out the best way to execute those ideas.
That makes a lot of sense. So then I guess I cannot take any credit for building the Starvo deck, just tuning it, because it was our friend Ben Hannon that beat me up with a rough draft version of the Control Starvo deck that I was like, okay, I want to play this deck. And then I just took his deck and tuned it quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say Icelander would be like, hey, I guess Oldheim. The first Oldheim deck was like a deck you built from scratch, because obviously Oldheim hadn't existed yet. Or, yeah, he was brand new. He just came out in Tales of Aria. So you building and iterating from that first deck and just, you know, blocking as efficiently as you can, playing your efficient attacks, like Enlightened Strike, and then swinging your Icy Hammer. And that was kind of like your thesis for the deck. And you executed that plan that really hadn't been seen before, where a lot of people were trying to play Oldheim a lot like Bravo, like Boomer Bravo when he first came out, like trying to like play these really big attacks and pummeling and stuff like that. And I remember even playing like Find All Spring Tunic was, people are like, what? Why would Oldheim play Find All Spring Tunic? And ever since then, it's just been the default chess piece for that hero.
Well, I didn't even figure out Tunic for Orlando. I figured it out right after Orlando. I think it was John that played Tunic in Orlando and also top-aided with Oldheim.
What chess piece did you use in Orlando?
I was playing Tectonic Plating.
There's no way you were playing Tectonic. I'm looking this up.
I was playing Tectonic Plating. I didn't figure it out.
You weren't. I remember you had finals.
We were in the hotel after day one of the tournament, and I'm like, I think maybe the Oldheim deck's supposed to be a Tunic deck instead of a Tectonic Plating deck. And you're like, no, you're crazy.
I just remember the cat. Remember that stray cat in Orlando?
I do remember the cat with his little ear clipped. It was sad.
Yeah, it was a cute cat. I remember that. I don't remember this old time conversation.
Maybe it was after the tournament. We were eating pizza and talking about it.
The calling in Orlando was in like July. What?
No, it wasn't.
This is saying Fab TCG, Michael Hamilton, Oldheim, deck calling Orlando 7/11/21.
Fab TCG calling Orlando. The U.S. National Champion Week in Orlando was Friday 5th of November to Sunday 7th of November.
Why do is it just code 7/11/21? Like, is this not a date? It's just your deck code then? 7
is the day and then the month. 7/11/20.
Oh, that's right. They do dates wrong in North America.
No, we do dates wrong. Everybody else does dates in a way that makes sense. Day, month, year is such a logical order because it's like the day is the smallest unit, the month is the middle unit, and then the year is the largest unit. So it makes sense to do day, month, year. It does not make sense to do middle, small, large. That formatting makes no sense, but we're already here.
No, you do go by like what's like the most important thing to know. Like the most important thing to know is like what month you're in, since that like dictates a lot of things about like the overall activity of your season. And then you want to know like, well, where specifically are you in that month? So that way you know like what exactly you want to do with your like month activity. And then obviously you got to keep track of what year it is. And you just always know what year it is anyways. That one goes last, you know?
Okay.
It's just strictly better, like the imperial system. Why would you ever use metric?
Metric is so much better. It just makes so much more sense.
I'm just in a fighting mood today, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you do have tectonic plating.
Yeah. Yes, there is tectonic plating.
Okay, I take it all back. You're bad at deck building.
I just hadn't figured it out yet. I figured it out shortly after the event was over.
Yeah.
And now, final spring tunic is a standard of old times everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so you get Icelander. There you go. Boom.
Even Icelander, I feel like, was tuning more than a completely... Like putting attacks in the Icelander deck was a new idea, but even then I took like an existing Icelander deck, cut 15 bad arcane damage cards, and put in 15 attacks, and went from there. Or actually cut less at first. I wasn't playing all the attacks at first, and I'm like, yeah, these attacks are good, let's play more and more. So I was like slowly tuning it by adding more attacks and cutting the bad arcane damage cards. But that's still deck building, right? Tuning is kind of deck building, it's just like small scale deck building. Deck building with a baseline. Or maybe all deck building is tuning, because even if you start from scratch and you throw together your 80 card Levia deck, very quickly you're going to get into the testing process and be like, these cards aren't doing what I thought they'd do, they need to get cut, we could replace them with these and try those cards out, and then you're going to keep trying different things until you find something that actually does what you're trying to do. Assuming you're a hero with a sufficiently deep card pool of powerful cards, so maybe that's where Levia has issues.
Yeah, it'll be interesting what Flesh and Blood looks like in like 2 or 3 years, once more talents and like card pools gets deeper and deeper, since it's like a non-rotating game. Mm-hmm. I think deck building and tuning will obviously get significantly harder as time goes on.
Yeah, just figuring out the best cards for every slot.
Yeah, and like from that sense, maybe Flesh and Blood is a little bit, has to like really be conscious of power creep from set to set, because we've even seen cards now like Arcanite Skullcap was like the shit. It was just the best headpiece generic in the game, and then Crown of Providence comes out and people are like, LOL, getting my bulk binder Arcanite Skullcap.
Arcanite Skullcap still sees a little bit of play, but for the most part, Crown of Providence is usually better. Yeah.
I think every time I've seen or played a deck that like I loaded up on Talishar and I'm like, oh, this deck has Arcanite Skullcap, and I play Arcanite Skullcap, I'm just like, man, I immediately wish this was Crown of Providence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Crown of Providence is very powerful.
Yeah. Just fixing your hand or picking up your arsenal and dodging in CNC, it's all gravy.
So I guess the card would be reasonably worse without CNC existing, because I think that's like one of the main uses of the card is they CNC you and you're like, okay, I will block with Crown of Providence. So I guess for tuning a deck, you talked about turning Ds into Cs and Cs into Bs. Other things to look at when tuning would be making sure that your cost curve makes sense. So figuring out how many blues a deck should play is always kind of tough, because like obviously you want as powerful of cards as you can. You don't want to be playing your blues, but you do need to have enough blues to pay for your turns. And depending on your hero, you might need more or less blues from turn to turn. So I think you should look at your deck and see like how often your deck can function off no blues. How often, if you have an all red hand, how many of your all red hands are functional? And then on the other hand, how many of your 3 blue hands or even 2 blue hands or 4 blue hands, how many of those are functional? And if you are not really able to function with too many blues or too few blues, then you should use that to either increase or decrease the amount of blues in your deck. And then the other thing is, if your plan on most turns is to pitch a blue and do things, you want to look at the cost curve and make sure you're able to efficiently use all of the resources from pitching a blue. So one problem with Viserai decks before they had Shrill was it was pretty hard for them to spend a full blue on their turn efficiently. Like, they'd have these cards that were cheaper because of Rune Chance, and they'd want to play them, and all of them would cost like 0 or 1. And then you had this Rosetta Thorn came out before Shrill, right? Shrill is
Yeah, Rosetta Thorn came out in Aria, and Shrill came out in Everfest.
Okay. So if you had 1 costs or 0 costs, and then you wanted to swing Rosetta Thorn, it was really hard to make that work off a blue curve. Whereas now that they have Shrill, they get to go their Mauvrin Skies into Shrill Skull Form into Rosetta Thorn, and it perfectly works off a blue pitch. And that's one of the most powerful 3-card hands that deck does. And then they just they can throw in more 0 cost things to make the turn even stronger. So make sure that your turns are able to efficiently use your resources.
And then not only that, keep track of like how often your hero wants, or how effective your hero is off playing less than 4 card hands. Because over the course of the game, you're going to be blocking at some point. That's just how it goes. I think even Fi, the most aggressive deck in the format, will probably block with a handful of cards over the course of the 3 or 4, 5 turns of the game it goes, depending on how well Fi drew. But anyways, so making sure that you're understanding what your hero is doing, not only like when you're ahead, but also managing the game when you're behind is extremely important. So that was what was really important about when you were building the Icelander deck, is you basically were thinking like, well, I'm basically always behind, so I want to make sure that all of my cards are as efficient or can maximize me being behind as possible in order for me to catch back up.
Mm-hmm. Part of being always behind is you start behind too.
Yeah. So like, I think that's just a lot of things that people usually overlook in their decks, where they're like, like everybody knows, like when you get into that like sub 10 health range and the game gets really grindy and sloggy because people are just having like really inefficient turns, and you're blocking with 3 to 4, like 3 cards, and you just have like 1 card left. You're like, I guess Arsenal, and then you block with 3 cards again, and then you have your Arsenal and your card left over, and you're like, I still can't do anything with this 2-card hand. It's really not where you want to be in deck building at that point, you know? So you have to figure out like, what are the ways that in the end game you can play like effective 2-card hands in order to threaten your opponent back and stuff like that.
And then, so once you've kind of got all this figured out and at least have ideas of how you're addressing all these things, the most important thing to do is playtest with your decks. And once you start playtesting, just keep all these questions that you had before in mind, and all the decisions you made to try to address these, see if they're actually like working. So if you put in some extra 1 cost go against to try to fix your curve, see if they're doing what you expected them to be doing. If you have too many 2 blocks and you really need to play 4-card hands, see what happens when your opponent plays anything with any disruption. And if your hand still works, see what your 2-card hands look like in games. See if maybe the cards you need to keep for your 2-card hands are the ones that block for 3, and then suddenly the ones you don't want to keep are the ones that block for 2, and that's problematic when you only get to keep when you need to block with 2 cards, and the cards you're blocking are the 2 cost or the 2 block cards. So what are I know you were talking about this before we started recording, that you were pulling up some of your old you have an article about effective playtesting. So do you want to?
Yeah, back when I was making written content instead of this easy podcast live content, and I had to go through an editor and improve a bunch of things. It was a giant, hard process, but I at least made money off of it. But like, I just like saying whatever I want, you know? I'm an off-the-cuff kind of guy, Michael, not a sit down and write a thoughtful, pleasant article kind of guy, you know?
Yeah. Just an off-the-cuff guy.
So one thing in my article that we haven't touched on, though, was using a hypergeometric calculator when deck building to make sure your ratios are right. And so the classic is if you want to play a certain number of blues where you're most likely to draw at least like one blue per hand. And when you're doing that, you want to know, well, do I want to have like a 90% chance to draw one blue in a hand? Do I want to have like 100% chance? Then you play all blues. But obviously you want to make sure that you have a reasonable expectation of distribution between your blues and like your resource cards and like the cards you plan on playing on a turn. And tools like the hypergeometric calculator can really help when thinking about stuff like that.
Yeah, that actually just came up today for me. I was working on a blitz deck and I kept running into hands where I drew all reds, and I plugged it in the hypergeometric calculator. And I'm like, okay, so I have 20 reds in my deck. What are the odds I draw all reds in a hand? And it's 5% every hand that if half your deck is reds, you're going to draw 5% each hand will be all reds. So I'm like, oh, maybe this is a problem. If 5% of the time I'm going to draw all reds and blitz games are going, I don't know, not that many turns, but a non-zero number of turns. And I really don't want to draw an all red hand. Maybe I need to look at that.
Yeah. And for a long time, I think Viscerais were playing 21 blues in the Viscerai deck, and I just put it in to refresh my memory on the numbers. So if you have a 60 card deck and you have 21 blues, 17% of the time you won't draw a blue. So that's almost 1 in 5, obviously. So if you think about it like that, so over the course of a game, if you go between 5 or 6 turns, one of those on average, you just won't draw any blues. And Viscerai's hands, typically, when he doesn't have any blues, are just not functional. You talked about like playing Mauvern Skies, Shrill into Rosetta Thorn. If you don't have a blue and your hand is just red, you're not doing much of anything at that point in time.
Yeah, your red mauve, red Shrill hand looks like a nightmare when you don't have a blue to pay for him.
Yeah, you're just like red mauve, pitch my other 2 reds, play Shrill, I don't get go again. I made 1 rune chain attack for 7. Woohoo. I did it. And obviously when you're pitching reds or you're not using the right ratio of cards to effects, I guess, if that makes sense. So like a common thing we'll say is like, well, Wounded Bull's a 2-card 8. Because you pitch 1 blue and when you're behind on life and you're dealing 8 damage. So you used the card you pitched and then this card that's attacking and boom, 2 cards per 8 damage. You've made 4 damage between 2 cards. And so if you're pitching a blue and attacking with Shrill, Mauve, and Rosetta Thorn, that means at face value, even if they full block the Shrill, you're going 4 cards for 12 damage. So you're exactly at rate.
3 cards.
Or 3 cards for 12 damage. So you're already like above rate in that situation. And that's not even factoring in whether or not the Shrill hit and created even more damage off of that. Mm-hmm. So that's why that turn cycle is like so efficient. But when you're pitching multiple reds in order to do that and then not swinging Rosetta Thorn afterwards, you're now all the way down to like 3 cards for 7 damage. And it's like,
Still get a 1 rune chance, still 8 damage.
8 damage, oh, okay.
If you pitch a yellow and do Mauve and Shrill, you get 3 card 8.
Look at that.
Which is much worse than 3 card 12.
Yeah. So that's why I really liked going all the way up to 23 or 24 blues, sometimes even in Viscerai, because a lot of your blues you're pretty happy to play with anyways. They're just inherently powerful, like Become the Arknight, or you're perfectly happy to use a blue Mauvern Skies in order to go again on a turn and stuff like that. And once you go up to 24, you go all the way up to a 12% of not hitting a blue. So that's a 3%, obviously increase in hitting a blue, but that can really matter when you're playing a game of Flesh and Blood. So that's what I mean, like just like really tuning and tweaking and like just adjusting those margins in order to make sure that your deck is functioning as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience when I was working on Chain for the first Pro Tour, where I started with a pretty low blue count, similar to a lot of the other decks. I think like around 20, 21 blues. And very quickly, I realized that I was having too many turns where I just wasn't drawing a blue, especially like later in the game before you reach your pitch stack, but still when you got like 4 or 5 shackles, you really need to hit a blue to be able to pay for all these cards you're flipping over into your blood debt area. And Otherwise, you could just like literally just die because you didn't have enough resources to pay for your own cards. So it was, I think, just in general, making sure you have enough blues is something that is maybe it's hard to stress. It's hard to stress it enough. I feel like that you just need to have a lot of blues to play your cards.
Yeah, unless like you're a deck that just has a lot of 0 cost cards and you don't really need the blues. Like I guess Lightning Briar, for like that classic example, but played like almost no blues in the entire deck.
Yeah, and even the blues they did play were still pretty strong in the deck. Like I'm thinking Blue Captain's Call, where it was just another non-attack that was +2. It was slightly worse than your red minnowisms, but it was a blue that also had this upside of still just pumping all of your attacks because everything costed 0.
Yeah, and then sometimes decks are able to cheat a little bit on that. Like, I'm thinking of a deck like Phi, where you could almost count all of your belittles as blues at that point, being able to like tutor them up in order to, have access to that one blue minnowism whenever they want, so they can play a little bit less blues than the typical deck. But there is a deck building cost in that they obviously have to have lots of 3 power cards in their deck in order to reveal to it, and that you're going to also have to pitch that initial card in order to play that belittle as well in order to get that blue. So
yeah, so the most efficient belittle turn is probably still you want a resource from somewhere, and pitching a red to get that resource isn't great either, even though you are able to go belittle for that blue minnowism.
But Fabrary has a hypergeometric calculator built right into it. That's one of my favorite things about it, is that the stats page, when you're deck building, I frequently look at all the little bar and pie graphs and tweak my numbers and figure out like what exact ratios and numbers I want to be playing in certain like sideboarded games between my main deck, how I'm, configuring it for certain matchups. Like maybe against like Icelander, obviously I want a few more blues, so maybe I'll even go up to like 27 blues at that point,
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I feel like such a flesh and blood boomer now because I'm still not using Fabrary. I'm still using FabDB, and this hypergeometric calculator built in sounds very helpful.
It is. I think I prefer FabDB's like aesthetics and like their like the interface for it. I think Fabrary feels very like bland and I don't know, just kind of like bare bones, I guess would be like a better, like it's there to do exactly what you need to do. No bells or whistles, no fancy anything. It's just like, boom, here's the cards, here's your numbers, go have fun. Whereas FabDB obviously put a good amount of time into like the aesthetics of the website, and like between like the backgrounds and the different, like the visual sideboarding is actually something like I really like about FabDB that I miss on Fabrary, because you kind of just have to like put the numbers around when you're doing it. But sometimes when I was sideboarding and building lists and stuff like that, I really liked in FabDB like visually seeing like what my 60 cards would look like and like moving the cards around pretty efficiently that way. But I don't know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Pros and cons to everything, even what website you use to build a deck.
Yeah. I guess this kind of also just goes to show that there's like a lot of good tools out there, and there's not always just the right answer for what you should use to work on.
Yeah.
I guess anything. I don't know.
So any final thoughts about deck building before we wrap things up here, Michael?
Oh gosh. Final thoughts on deck building. I think just having very mindful playtesting and taking your idea and really giving it a fair shot, just putting the cards that you think are good together and going out and playing with them, and really just being honestly evaluating how each thing was in the game will go a long way towards helping you build good decks. How about you?
Okay.
Any thoughts?
You heard it here first, everybody. Build good decks to do good things and have good tournament results.
Is that what it sounds like I'm saying? Oh no.
Good things are good and bad things are bad, so obviously do the good things and then don't do the bad things, and then you too can win all the callings like Michael Hamilton.
Okay, let me try again. So everything in Flesh and Blood can kind of boil down to raw numbers of value, since it's how much damage it's dealing versus how much life it is saving you from your opponent dealing. So cards like Wounded Bull are very clearly giving you this 2-card 8, which is efficient, and there are things in the game you can do that are significantly more efficient than that, but 2-card 8 is not inefficient by any means. It's a very, very reasonable thing to be doing. So just like look at your turn, seeing how much value you're getting out of your turn cycle. If you block with 2 cards, each blocking for 3. You're preventing 6 damage, and then you play your 2 card 8. That's dealing 8 damage. That's a 14 damage turn cycle. And just like evaluate how much value you're getting from turn cycle to turn cycle out of your 4 card hands, and that would go. That's kind of how you could. That's kind of what I mean when if the things are good. Like if you're playing Viscerai, you block with a 3 block, and then you go Mauve Shrill and present 12 damage. Mauve Shrill or Rosetta Thorn, or even more if the Shrill hits, then you're getting a 15 damage turn cycle or more if the Shrill hits. If you go Mauve Shrill Swarming Rosetta Thorn, then that's a 20, not a 20, that's 12 plus 5, 17 damage turn cycle with the 4 cards. So just like look at how much damage your good turns are worth and your bad turns are worth in terms of raw value per turn cycle. And that's how you know if things are good or bad.
And what's nice is that when you're playing on Talus Shar, it just keeps track of that for you. At the end of the game, you'll get a whole bunch of statistics, like how often did you pitch a card, how often, like what was your average life gained or damage ratio per turn cycle and stuff like that at the end of the game. And that's really helpful for knowing how well your deck is performing overall after you've finished a game of Flesh and Blood. And those numbers are also extremely helpful for monitoring those types of things.
Yeah, definitely. Good cards are good. Good decks are good. Make good decks. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I don't know why we just didn't have a 30-second podcast this week. We just meandered on for like 40 minutes here. We could have just summarized it like that. Shit, man.
It was more fun this way, you know? And I think we got some good information out there. I guess let me know if you disagree in the comments, but hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, and if you think this wasn't helpful at all, please let us know what would be helpful. You tell us. Let us help you. Help me to help you. Because we want to be helpful and we want to do good things, but we can't do the good things if the good things we're doing aren't good. So that means they would be bad things. So help us to do good things to help do good things in the world.
Yeah, we don't want to do bad things.
At least you don't.
All right.
I can take it or leave them.
Until next time.
But what's most important, everybody, is next time you're playing Flesh and Blood, always remember to mind your manners. Thanks for listening, everybody.